Recording is on.
Okay, welcome to the Bitcoin Design Guide Jam session number 10, June 28th. Today we continue the big topic of how we add Lightning to the guide, which was a big discussion last week. And we already have a lot going on here. So for everyone here, real quick, thanks for coming, of course. And in the sidebar notes, I posted a Google Doc. And if you click in there, you're going to see a list of 5 links. There's a GitHub discussion about what should be added to the guide. Then I put together a document. Stephen put together 2 documents. And then John's also just posted a document around creating a Lightning workshop. So it's awesome. Everybody's pouring down their I feel like we should still start a little bit from the top to make sure we're all on the same page before we get into these little details, especially because last week, I think there's still a kind of a lot of different ideas and expectations, and it might be different levels of experience with Lightning also. But I wanted to give Steve the chance, and maybe we can start with Steve laying out his ideas, and then other people, if they have other ideas or if they want to add to it, maybe you can continue. And for my part, I'm going to be in listening mode and asking a lot of questions and figure out where everyone is. I don't know how you want to approach it. How does that sound? Do you have anything you want to add or change to the format?
Sounds good.
Good to go.
Sounds awesome.
Okay, please, Steve, then take it away.
Over to me. Cool, thanks. I just posted to the chat a link to a comment I sent out yesterday to a GitHub issue, which really lays out my thoughts. Some of you might have already read it. I'll just summarize it here, but I'd encourage everyone to read it. But yeah, so I'll lay this out. I'd love to hear feedback on it and see where there's other views or if I made some mistakes in my thinking. So I'm coming at this from the argument that, or first of all, with an assumption that the design guide is optimizing for non-custodial usage for Bitcoin, which I believe that is the case and we're all in agreement. If not, we should pause and discuss. But if we assume that we're optimizing for non-custodial usage of Bitcoin, and I'm going with the assumption that we all care about financial inclusion and widespread adoption of Bitcoin, like anyone who wants to use Bitcoin non-custodial in a non-custodial fashion should be able to do so. With those 2 assumptions, I walked through a little bit of math, which shows how on-chain scaling simply does not work to achieve the first 2 goals or assumptions that I just stated. I walked through a couple different use cases. One is Bitcoin's like the native currency, the internet, you're using it for payments. And I just went with an average of 3 payments per week in that use case per user. That's roughly what Americans use a credit card for. We can quibble with that, but I think it's a reasonable assumption. In fact, I can certainly argue it'll be much higher than that in the age of microtransactions, machine to machine, etc. But let's just go with 3 per week. That would mean we'd be at a maximum 700,000 users globally, 700,000, due to the capacity constraints of on-chain, the block size. Apologies if there's noise in the background. The second scenario, even if we take the saving use case, the hodler use case, and let's assume that the average number of transactions per saver is 4 per year. I chose that as sort of a blend between some people doing recurring buys every paycheck, and other people maybe just doing one transaction a year to buy or sell or redo their custody. But with a blend of 4 per year. And with that assumption, you get a maximum of 27 million global savers or hodlers. Now, keep in mind, the estimate right now is there's over 100 million people who own Bitcoin. But just based on that math, we have to assume the vast majority don't self-custody. They just have it on Bitstamp or Binance or Coinbase or Cash App or various custodians. Also bear in mind, the blockchain is for anyone to use. So already today, those custodians use a substantial portion of the blockchain. So the 27 million number is like a ceiling. It's actually probably more like 10 million maximum humans could use on-chain Bitcoin to hodl. So my argument is, if we want to achieve widespread use of Bitcoin, hundreds of millions of people being able to use non-custodial Bitcoin, the vast majority will use Lightning Network, or perhaps some new technology in the future we don't know yet to do decentralized scaling. But with what we know now, Lightning is our best shot. So if we assume Lightning Network for the vast majority of our users that we're targeting, my argument is it should be woven into the design guide and just be a sort of a default, the default case for the design guide. Like, this is how you design Bitcoin products for mainstream adoption. That's my argument. There's beyond scaling, there's other reasons Lightning Network, I think, is sort of necessary for a good payments experience. Settlement speed, instant versus tens of minutes, which I argue is just not feasible for the vast majority of payments. Fees, and also there's like new UX possibilities for paying people. Instead of like weird addresses and letters and numbers you have to pay, you can actually pay people by their name. You can map their name to their pub key for a Lightning node using KeySend. And then I go through this post with specific ideas of where the guide could add a lot of value to people building Lightning-enabled Bitcoin products, including in the sections of onboarding and private key management, payments, case studies, etc. And specific areas that I think product designers will need help is like how to send a payment, and especially the blending and mixing of on-chain and Lightning. And then number two, how to receive a payment, especially around being quote offline, like on a mobile phone. There's a lot of challenges there. So what are the different UX treatments to handle that challenging case? And then there are a bunch of technical details with Lightning which might rear their head for a typical user. And how do we deal with those exceptional cases, like channel reserve, when a channel closes perhaps unilaterally and there's some fees? How is all that exposed to the user? I argue that in general, this stuff should be suppressed and hidden, but it can impact UX. So how, I think we should analyze what are the different ways to reveal that to the user without overwhelming them with a lot of complexity. Last thing I'll say, I listened to the community call on Wednesday. Great discussion. Stephen, I think you have a lot of great thinking around Lightning. The one thing I'd wanted to mention, that you gave the example of on a MacBook, like Mac OS, you can, if a power user can go in and dive into like the Wi-Fi, very advanced network settings. So that I acknowledge that. But if you look at an iPhone, I looked up the settings of Wi-Fi on my iPhone, and I couldn't see any way to do that. So it's just interesting to note that Apple chose on an iPhone to not expose that detail, and I basically have no control at all. So I might relate a MacBook to more being like a Lightning node router, or like the use case is someone who wants to be a node operator or to earn fees off of running a router. And there's no question for that type of use case that they need to have all those details of channel management, node management, etc. But for the 99% case of users, I'm not sure they need that detail. And so I'm not anti having the design guide deal with that use case as well. But to me, that almost feels like that should be the separate section for power users and node operators. And the primary guide should be for mainstream users. So I'll stop there.
Anybody want to respond to that?
I've got a question. I think I largely agree with a lot of what you're saying, just in terms of that we need Lightning to scale Bitcoin. I am a little curious, and if anybody else aside from Steve has any insight on this, please jump in. But I'd be curious, Steve, to get your thoughts on security versus having everything running on Lightning. Like, I typically think of cold storage as being, the most secure place for my Bitcoin. And so given the constraints we're, running into with, scaling layer one, how do you think about, like, if we're transacting daily in Bitcoin and, we've onboarded, 90% of the world onto Lightning wallets, how do you think about savings accounts and, storing large amounts of wealth versus the daily transactions?
Yep, it's a good question. I certainly don't have all the answers, and it easily gets into the block size debate as well, which I think I would suggest we just assume the block weight doesn't change,
yeah,
and then save that for another day. We can only deal with the current design and realistically what the current design is. But yeah, I mean, the question you raise is a good one. My current thinking is, and I posted this on Slack maybe a week ago. It kind of was buried in a thread, so probably didn't get a lot of visibility, but an exciting approach, or an approach that I'm excited about, is one in which a user has a single wallet that is both for savings and spending, and to use multi-sig and some clever tricks to get the security you'd want out of savings and the ease of use for spending. So imagine a 2 of 3 wallet, 2 of 3 multi-sig, in which the user has one key in a hardware wallet that is stored away in a safe place, like literally a safe or a bank vault or something that's kind of inaccessible. Another key is on their phone, and another key is in the cloud with some kind of trusted third party. So it's non-custodial because the user has 2 of the 3 keys. They don't need the third party custodian to spend. If they want to spend all of their money, like their savings, immediately, they need to access the hardware wallet. That key would be needed for that type of spend. If they want to do daily spending, small amounts, like let's say they have $10,000 of total savings, but they only want to, you could put a limit on their daily spending of like $100 a day, something like that, in which case they can just use their mobile phone, the app on their phone, to do that type of daily spending. The key on the phone and the key in the cloud would sign that transaction, and the cloud would actually be enforcing the spending policy to limit how much could be spent. And that would allow a user to have one wallet and serve both use cases. And I think strikes a really good balance between security and easy use for the 2 different use cases. Now, having said that, do we still run into on-chain scaling issues if we have 100 million people globally who are non-custodial and they all want a savings account? We certainly reach some kind of limit, as the math I just ran through suggests. So I don't have all the answers there. I do observe continued innovation in cryptography and things that people think of on layer 2 and even potentially a layer 3. So it's sort of my hope that evolves and allows us to share UTXOs per users, and still gives them the vast majority of the benefits of Bitcoin. But that gets into sort of speculative nature.
Interesting. Thank you. John's said Schnorr and Taproot in the chat there. I do have some more thoughts, I guess, feedback for you that I thought about when I was reading your GitHub post, but I'll just save it for later in the conversation when we get to me.
Thank you.
Does anybody think something completely different, or there's a gap in the logic, or anybody who really thinks, like, I don't know how this is going to work out, or if this makes sense?
I saw Mick posted something about Lightning for gaming, health. I guess that's also with like machine to machine transactions and stuff. And what place does it have in the guide? I guess is his question.
Yeah, happy to jump in, everyone. I think I guess piggybacking off Steve's point, I think it's definitely reasonable. I'm also a big believer and hopeful for Lightning and the ability to scale Bitcoin further. But what's interesting is like Steve's point is very kind of vision focused, right? If Bitcoin does go forward in a sort of and becomes sort of like this layered ecosystem, then you see this second layer and third layers emerging, and sort of encompassing entire economies of different sorts. And so all of a sudden, Bitcoin and Lightning doesn't just become a financial tool available for financial companies, but a tool that enables all sorts of companies like gaming, like health, like we already started to see that, right? So I play with Thunder Games and I earn Lightning. I use Smiles, I walk and I earn Bitcoin. Like you can start seeing how an entire plethora of non-financial companies will start integrating with Bitcoin, and they are becoming financial companies without regulatory approval, without needing a bank. And so if we start thinking about a Bitcoin design guide focus on Lightning, we need to probably keep that in mind, that a lot of these companies will not be companies for holding Bitcoin, for buying Bitcoin. It will then not be like financial companies. People will not have buying Bitcoin for hodling's sake, but it'll be for very, very different use cases. And yeah, so it's, I guess, recognizing that and the potential kind of flexibility of Lightning, I think will be helpful.
I have a question about that. Are you? So I agree with you on like gaming potential and other use cases. I view that as consistent with what I said. Is that what you're saying? Or
totally. I'm sort of jumping off, sort of piggybacking on what you said, and sort of expanding that.
Okay.
It will not. Yeah, I guess it will not be just buying, but I think it's kind of like exactly what you're saying. Just sort of expanding the potential. Kind of builders, I guess, in the space that will not just be buying, but it'll be all sorts of different transactions. I think it was implicit in what you were saying, though.
Okay.
I agree with Mick, but I think that it's somehow important for us to set the boundaries of what we are going to talk about in the guide, so that we don't risk going too far away from the core ideas.
There's always case studies.
Can you give an example? Because I'm not aware of going away from any core ideas.
I mean, for the idea of talking about gaming, for example, for me, sound a little bit too far away from everything that we have already built till now. That's an example.
Okay.
I think it's a longer term look at it, for sure. And as I wrote there, these kind of like alternative cases, we have case studies for that. At the core of it, it's still going to be send, receive, buy, sell kind of interactions, right? Whether it's in a game or whatever else. So it's some kind of wallet that's integrated into the game that's doing that. Unless I guess RGB, non-fungible tokens, etc. But again, that's kind of like out there. But I think like if we could get people who are interested in those topics, it's well worth like researching them in parallel. So if it's a topic that you want to like research, like create a working group, get some other people that interested in it. I wanted to do like a video, for instance. A lot of people in the community asking about like Liquid and NFTs. They're asking about NFTs, and they're doing like some Ethereum shit and stuff. So I'm like, it's possible on Liquid, so might as well kind of like create some material, like just a video walkthrough of like how to do that. I have no idea how to do it yet, but I think having these kind of like separate working groups and stuff could help create some of that content, alternative content.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that once we have these separated places, and mostly when we talk about use cases, it will be really cool just to it will be the proper place to explore these different usages.
Just one question. Sorry, Alexa, go on.
Oh, that's okay. Well, I was just going to say that I think it's important to be able to keep in mind all of the ways that people could use Bitcoin. And because even if you think of onboarding people, you never know. Maybe somebody's actually playing a game and that's how they learn about this stuff. So it's something to keep in mind. And maybe it is more for use cases. Maybe at one point in time it will be useful somewhere else. But I do think we should keep that in mind because it's not just about spending and saving. I think technology is advancing in ways that that need to be explored at some point in time.
Right. So I agree with being open to different use cases. Gaming might be one. There's lots of others. But I guess I feel like my argument still stands. Whether it's use case X, Y, or Z, if we're trying to design Bitcoin for more than 700,000 people, then we need to consider Lightning. I mean, like, we have to assume Lightning Network. I just don't understand. So I'd like to better understand the counter argument to that.
So I think what we're getting into here is more about how the guide is structured. So if let's say the guide talks about onboarding at some point, that I as a designer, I don't just see, okay, onboarding Lightning, but there's onboarding content that I can use for onboarding users on Lightning. But if I want to, I can also take those same onboarding learnings and apply them to my gaming app or whatever else I want to do. Do I understand that correctly? That it's just not super perfectly too limited to one use case, but there's a flexibility kind of built into the content. Do I understand that correctly? No, it doesn't say anything against what you're saying. It's kind of a different topic.
What you just said doesn't make sense to me. So because would the gaming application be custodial or on-chain only? Because we've already been there with gaming on-chain only. That was Satoshi Dice. It doesn't scale. It already proved that out. So what gaming application, other than something that only has like 100 users, that's non-custodial, doesn't use Lightning?
I don't think anyone's making the argument against Lightning here. I think we pretty much are, like, we have alignment. Stephen, I think you have alignment with that as well, Nick and others. So the question, as Christoph was saying, is more about the structure, which is kind of like a bit of a debate that we're trying to figure out, like, how do we layer this Lightning content onto the on-chain structure that we have currently?
Right. That's my question, though. My question is to Christoph, what he just said. To Christoph, you said the onboarding section, it could be for Lightning or it could be for gaming. I don't understand that.
Yeah. No, just to clarify, what I'm talking about is very high level. For example, I talked to Bitcoin core team and somebody said, well, Lightning onboarding in the guide deals with recovery phrases, and we have these wallet.dat files, and like, does it apply? And I'm like, yeah, obviously it applies. It applies in the sense that the way that you approach people, the way that you explain things, the way that you guide them through whatever steps they need to take, the individual steps might be different, but the idea of onboarding people and the design principles, they're still the same, right? And even if you're in gaming, it's still clear that you need to properly explain whatever game mechanics you have, whatever way in your game, people add money, make deposits, or put money in their own wallet. Like, the same fundamental principles apply of guiding people through process and introducing them to your system. That's kind of what I meant. It's not really so tied to anything technical, but just more so those top level kind of pure design principles and ideas and approaches.
Okay. So to me, I still think we need to assume Lightning Network. So when we're talking about recovery and backups, we have to assume it's more than just a seed phrase. Like, Lightning state needs to be backed up, otherwise you can lose your funds. So whether it's gaming or some other application, if we're talking about scaling non-custodial, we have to assume to guide product designers on how to store all the information needed for recovery.
I think the part of the guide is like the current state of the guide. One of my favorite phrases, the technology primer, for instance, It walks you through like different bits of the technology, whether it's blocks and transactions and addresses and whatnot. There are sections in there which in my view, we kind of need to like refactor to layer on Lightning or like interweave Lightning with like our existing structure. And I think a lot of it can actually line up. You know, if you're talking about addresses, and I've mentioned this before on the issue that you commented on, addresses, they work pretty much the same as like normal invoices. Um, uh, uh, um, there are some differences in terms of maybe key send or like different errors that you may get, routing errors and stuff when you push a payment out. That we'll have to figure out how that works in the existing structure. That these things may not happen. These error cases don't happen on chain. But I think the majority of it we could layer in what we have, and that means that the content may have to start getting adapted to be more generic, which I'm fine with, because I think we need to like explain like the fundamental concepts less than the technology, and those concepts would align on both networks.
I feel like we're saying all the same thing. I feel like we're all on the same page. We're just approaching.
Can I ask
slightly
specific
different
questions though?
perspectives.
Because I'm feeling like people are agreeing on Lightning, but then, or I'm still not clear on if there's consensus on Lightning Network sort of baked in as default throughout the guide versus an isolated section. And if there is, if we are disagreeing on that, that's where I want to keep pushing because I don't understand the argument to keep it isolated. I definitely understand the argument from a, it's easier to add a separate section to the existing guide is less work. I get that argument, but I'm pushing for what's best for product designers and users of the guide, even if it's more work. And so in my post, I listed 4 areas that I think would need to be modified, and I'm certain there's more. I didn't do a thorough review, but one would be onboarding, and specifically around backups and recovery. I already mentioned that, but my argument is we sort of assume Lightning Network, so we assume then we would have to have additional state backed up, and we should speak to that. Number 2, private key management, basically the same thing. And number 3, payment. The payment section would just be that would probably be the vast majority of the work needed to quote add Lightning. And then case studies for daily spending. That was one I noted that probably would need to be updated to assume Lightning Network.
Personally, I would be comfortable with it just being merged in with the existing content, as in assuming that, Lightning is kind of the default way of onboarding to people to Bitcoin, and, updating the existing guide to include Lightning on there. I will go ahead and say that I do think that we should make sure that we're, including layer 1 on-chain stuff, preserving that kind of information, because I do think for the time being, for security purposes and long-term savings, I think that there's a compelling use case for keeping funds in cold storage and all that. But I would be in favor of just having it be merged, just having Lightning kind of be the default way. And when something differs between on-chain and Lightning, we can put a footnote or some kind of description, explaining it to that effect. But I think Lightning will probably be the predominant way that people are onboarded to Bitcoin.
In the case of like if we look at like time scale when we want this content to be included for Lightning, if it is faster to do the Lightning section as a separate thing, if that's the argument, then doing it the alternative way, the slower way, supposedly, how I don't think, but how like what would be the time frame for that? Like, are we considering that as a factor?
Personally, I don't really feel like I know enough to be comfortable enough to to write this content that is merging everything in together. I'm wondering if that basically means that we are advocating a hybrid wallet by default, so that it will be able to handle both on-chain and Lightning. Kind of feels like we assume that. In which case we might have to kind of learn about that and incorporate that. So I just personally don't feel like I am in a position just now to kind of say, oh yeah, absolutely, we could do this, and it's a piece of cake and it will be done in 3 months. Because it feels like there might be things we uncover that we need to solve that aren't solved.
I can speak a little bit to that. I think it's gonna be really hard. This is where a lot of the unknowns are, uncertainties, and a lot of design challenges. So I highly doubt it could be done in 3 months. But I also think that's where the value is. I think we can look at Moon Wallet in particular, but also Breeze and Phoenix, and just look at the design decisions they've had to make to create a reasonable UX, and they've all done a great job. But there's still a lot more improvement to be made. So I think it's going to be hard to, however if all the design community does is add a new section for Lightning and just go like a Lightning 101 primer, then that's not that hard. That could be done in 3 months, but does that really help the ecosystem? So I think to help the ecosystem, we're going to face challenging problems. And how to blend on, and I totally agree with Stephen. Like, I'm definitely not, to be clear, I'm not advocating removing anything to do with on-chain. There's an interaction. I mean, on-chain doesn't go away in the future. So the challenge lies in how do we basically hide Lightning technology to scale Bitcoin is really the high level. And there's lots of details there, unsolved problems.
That sounds good, and I'm totally okay with challenges. Maybe what in my mind, I'm wondering if trying to make a decision right now whether we go, one way or the other in terms of chapter or everything merged in. I'm sure we all like to go the kind of let's not do the separate chapter, let's work it all in. But I'm just not sure if we gain too much by kind of trying to make a call right now before we know where everybody stands in terms of knowledge and what problems we might have going that route. So my position would be just let's keep our minds open, let's kind of dive in and find out what the problems are, what the challenges are, with a mind to getting to a content that is unified.
I think a possible approach that we could have is just creating a separated chapter with all the content about Lightning, with the intention of merging it to the actual guide in the future.
I think a lot of the content will just be duplicated, though. Like, realistically, sending Bitcoin. What do? You need to on Lightning. You need to generate something. Let's call it an address or an invoice, and you need to give it to someone. You need to, then that person, approves the payment in their wallet, and then they wait for it to get confirmed or routed.
I just find it somehow scary, just the whole idea of bringing or adding Lightning to everything that we already have.
But don't feel so precious about the guide. I mean, we spent a lot of time on it, but the idea is that this was like a version 1, like an alpha release in a way. I don't feel like it's all perfect and it's also amazing. Like, we can shape this thing to whatever we need it to be and whatever helps people the most in the ecosystem.
Now, like John says, a lot of these, in Pavlonex also mentioned it in the chat, a lot of these concepts are things that apply to both. So maybe just about reviewing the content, like keeping an open mind here and not feeling so worried about it, but reviewing kind of the content, seeing this applies to both, and then have a part in that page that says this is just Lightning, this is just on-chain. And I think we'll find that there's a lot more similarities here than we realize. And making it into a separate section, we may miss out that connection and we may repeat a bunch of stuff that doesn't need to be there. So yeah, I'm all for integrating, I think.
I think there are a lot of specific Lightning design challenges, though. Like I know we are saying there was a lot of parallel between on-chain and Lightning, but there's very specific Lightning design challenges, right? I don't know if Steve can maybe talk to like one or two concrete design challenges that maybe you've spoken to guys at Moon or Phoenix about that don't necessarily directly relate to on-chain stuff.
Well, just new problems introduced. Like, so one would be receiving money. You need to be quote online, and your phone, and by that, your phone is not. If your phone's in your pocket and you don't have the app open, you're not online in this context. So that's an enormous difference between on-chain Bitcoin, and then of course, payments themselves can be very different, much better than with Lightning Network, but it's quite different. One thing I wanted to respond to Daniel, like to be clear, I don't think it's an appropriate forum to make a decision right now. That's not the way open source community should work, because there's people that are part of our community that aren't on this call. So I'm not calling for a decision. I'm trying to lay out what in my mind seems obvious and trying to understand other views, and I still don't see the guide being useful if Lightning is off in its own section and the rest of the guide doesn't mention Lightning. I don't see how that helps future product designers and builders build mainstream Bitcoin applications that are non-custodial. Literally the entire guide then would not be appropriate for them except for the Lightning section, which would.
The only way I guess we could try and play devil's advocate. So the only way that would not work, I guess, would be if your user is a builder on L1 and on the base layer, on the layer 1, and you add these additional footnotes or kind of data about Lightning, which are not relevant to them. But in that case, as long as you make it obvious that that's Lightning, then they can skip through it. And then the opposite case, which is somebody's building a product on Lightning, and they don't care about the data, the information on the base layer. And since a lot of the information is doubled, you have to be very careful at specifying what is base layer, what is L1, without duplicating it. So it's just about, I think it's definitely possible, but I guess that's maybe the possible concern, is just understanding, sort of being able to tailor the information to both base layer builders and Lightning builders.
Yeah, Steve, I think your points are noted about the usefulness of the guide without Lightning. Totally agree. At the moment, we have nothing about Lightning, so I think anything we start here is going to be an improvement. And yeah, I'm with you. I want to get to that point, but I think it's also fair to say that a lot of these problems just aren't solved by anybody in the community, right? Let alone designers. Just the point about being online to receive money. We can state that your app should make sure that you are online to receive money at all point. But it's a technical question at the end of the day that I certainly at the moment don't know what the solution is. So, just like laying the cards on the table, that we have a lot to solve here.
That's not true. There's lots of design considerations for that. There's several different, it's a thorny issue, and it's definitely, I agree, it's technical, but there's a lot of UX and design related issues for how to address that.
Yeah, I'm not waving the white flag here saying we shouldn't do anything. I'm sure there's a ton to dive into. I'm just saying some things might be beyond this community.
No doubt there needs to be technical assistance with this, but we do have quite a few technical people on this call and in the community. And so I don't know, I guess I agree. There are design challenges that need thinking. That's what I'd love to see the community think through them, analyze them, and communicate them to help others. What other, if we're only putting in the guide solved problems that everyone else has figured out, how is that useful?
Well, I think we might be talking across each other here, but
this is exciting here.
This is what we should be doing. We should be looking into these problems like with a mind to solving them. I just, sometimes we're talking about the end product already, right? We're talking about the guide, and what we should be talking about, I think, is maybe the process, which is like diving into things, as opposed to like figuring out like, is this a separate thing? Is it let's just get started, I think.
I guess I'm still not, so I completely agree. There's really challenging problems for design, technical and design. But whether that's solving those in a separate section or interwoven with a guide, they're still really hard problems. I'm still not convinced that it's, assuming we tackle those really hard problems, and that's a lot of work, assuming we do that, whether that's a separate section or integrated into the existing guide, that to me doesn't seem like a huge difference of work. I could be wrong, but like, so one potential thing, like someone could just sketch out in more detail, what would the onboarding section look like if we wove in Lightning? I mean, I took a quick look at it and thought through my head what it might look like, but like someone actually putting in, a few hours of work thinking through that might help us realize what would it look like. How does it somehow scare away someone who doesn't care about Lightning? And is it 10 times more work to add it to the guide versus a separate section? My instinct is no, but if someone experimented with that, we'd have more information to go on.
Now, something to think about is that I think we'll see more technology being created in the future, right? So we're probably going to come back here sometime in the future and think, now aside from Lightning, there's another way to make payments. So maybe it'll be more, I don't know if I can explain it properly, but we're thinking like payments, right? That's structure, like that's number one. And if we're thinking of apps that may deal with Lightning and apps that may deal with on-chain, and maybe it'll be about guiding them to each specific section. So if we think of, so we may be thinking about having payments as a general statement and being able to guide to the on-chain or to the Lightning. I don't know if that makes sense. It kind of sort of, so that if there is something different than Lightning, then we'll still arrive at payments and you'd see a different option. And the other thing is, I know we'll be thinking a lot about this, and I know that we don't know enough about Lightning just yet, but I think that's the point of this community, that there's always going to be something new that we need to learn. And I know, Daniel, you agree with that. And I think maybe just like you said, to think about how we can learn these things to be able to apply them and show them in the guide, because this isn't the first thing that we're going to find that it's new to us. There's going to be many things in the future, and we need to kind of figure out how we deal with those things so we can know about them and explain them and try to solve those issues. And that is not a solution right now, but it is something that we need to try and figure out. How do we make this process kind of improved somehow so that we can try new things, talk to the community, learn about them, and figure out what the solutions could be within the community. So and then apply them to the Bitcoin design guide.
We have about 13 minutes left here now. Why don't we spend the rest of the time on that topic about how we move forward and how we make this happen? Because we're how many people here? 15? We can get all kinds of stuff done, right? I mean, we just need to divide and conquer properly. John's already talked about workshops. Thunder Biscuit suggested and already created a plan for a reading club, a Lightning book, which Stephen, you're already doing on your own also, right? You have a...
Yeah, me and the Atlanta Bitcoiners are doing a reading club for Lightning starting on July 7th.
Yeah, so I think those are really great starting points already. And then maybe, well, what other things can we do in order to move this forward? Do we need more like weekly meetings like this where we just talk generally, or do you have some individual things that you'd like to do? What do you think? What should we do?
I feel like a good way of doing it would be, as actually John suggested in the chat, is maybe actually just like, we all know that we want to integrate Lightning into the guide. Perhaps the best way to start is to divide and conquer. We split into groups that want to look at specific areas like onboarding or transactions. And we then do like weekly meetups with those groups. And we say, okay, like what sort of things need working on? We start documenting that process. And then, you know, like it can even start off by like the guide evolves into, we merge it where we have a chapter of onboarding and then we have sub chapters of onboarding with Lightning or onboarding with on-chain. And then eventually they get merged. Like if people are worried about this, because I like when you're working with living documents as well, there's always this like touchy sensation of like, I don't want to change it too much just yet. Or like, what if we lose this old content that's really good? Like a lot of the content that we've written is really good, but this stuff needs to come in. It's just a question of like when we merge it.
Mr. Pavlodex would like to speak.
Yeah. Thanks, Christoph. I just wanted to bring up like that I also agree that Lightning needs to be implemented by default in the guide. I've been using it for 3.5 years. I lost literally thousands of dollars in Lightning. I was like one of the first 30 nodes or 40 nodes, and it is still in transitionary phase. And I think we have to assume that as well, because I don't receive my payments from the BTC-based server foundation via the Lightning, because I don't feel comfortable keeping that amount of money, you know, in a hot wallet. But I also wanted to bring up like a practical tip. What we can do, since we will be all learning and the guide itself isn't complete, there are so many tasks to complete, I suggest that we can create just a separate Lightning branch, and we keep it that as V2 of the Bitcoin Design Guide, because I think 3 or 6 months is not really realistic. I don't think we will do it in a year, because it really takes a lot of refactoring of the existing content, and also many people here first need to learn about the Lightning in order for us to be able to even think about it. So I would suggest that we keep it as a separate branch, while we also iron out the content that we already have that people can already use in order to build up applications. And that way we will, in a way, achieve better synchronization, I think is the word. Yeah, Connor. Connor wants to speak, so maybe...
No. After you finished it.
Yeah, so... Yeah, I think that's the only logical way to develop this further, because if we keep adding Lightning to the guide and have all of these unfinished pages, it will be confusing and it won't make any sense. So our current release process is that we keep pushing changes live, and for this particular change, it is significant. I would keep it in the backgrounds and then push it maybe in a year once it's all ready, because I don't see it as incrementally rolling out stuff. Yeah, sorry for the rant.
No, I was just going to quickly say that just on the learning education side of things, like there's gaps in everyone's knowledge specifically to Lightning. I'm not sure how much designers, product people take away from diving super deep into like mastering the Lightning Network book per se. I think one thing that perhaps we didn't do as much in the version 1 of the guide is engage with projects early on and try to identify, like, in some areas at least, in some areas we did, in some areas we didn't. I think it makes a lot of sense to engage with these projects early on in the process, the Moons, the Phoenixes, the Breeze, and understand the actual design challenges they have, and also experience Lightning as much as possible as well, and try to identify the design challenges that way, because I feel like some of what we have in the guide is information that people could easily find elsewhere, and doesn't necessarily solve specific design challenges. So I'd just encourage us to try and engage with projects a bit earlier this time, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And also the first part of the section or of the guide, or the first 9 months or so, a lot of sections were written by individuals. There was kind of a sense of ownership. And if we don't want to do this now, then of course we need a different structure of how we work together and how we collaborate and communicate. And to get to something that Johns is really excited about, or thinks is very important, is the attacking problems both from a user experience perspective and from a technical perspective, because most likely the sweet spot combines the best of both worlds and finds the wiggle room in both things to create a really good experience. So understanding at least some of the tech, understanding the design itself, and understanding users and working with real projects from the problems that they actually have and how they go about them, we probably need all of it. And rely on each other for all kinds of different expertise. That would be my expectations.
And there's a little side discussion going on about having this branch, which I'm totally in favor for, having the branch that kind of working and experimenting with for Lightning. What I was addressing was what Panek said about launching it after a year. I think I did these mentorship workshops in December. I started getting people reading the technology primer, especially that page, and it was a really great page to get people that foundational knowledge about Bitcoin, and it was very useful. It was super useful. A lot of people, I had about 10 people in those mentorship workshops. They found it quite useful. They got the concept pretty quickly. I don't think we need to wait until 100% of the content is released. But I do agree that we work on a brand separately as we're working it out. But we could keep pushing them in a bit more agile way.
Maybe we can have some sort of a testing ground section for Bitcoin design, because I do agree in part with Pavlinix that it would be confusing if you only find a little bit of Lightning here and there and it's not there. Yeah. But I do also agree with Johns in saying that we need to be a little bit more agile. Perhaps this is where we get to rethink what is it that we can start releasing on Lightning, even if it's just exploration, Maybe there's something else that could be like that.
People will always have the access to that separate branch to preview it. It just won't be prominently displayed to someone, because it really doesn't make sense to me to onboard people on Lightning and then talk about on-chain payments and stuff like that. It's completely different concept and mindset, in my opinion. So I would just keep it until it makes sense to present it entirely and as a whole, and not just in sections.
Okay, I've written that down as a concern in the notes. So how would we look at it as a concern right now? Something that we have to figure out, but we're not quite sure yet.
This also assumes that people are reading the guide from top to bottom, so which we don't know yet. But I doubt people are. So far, there's been a number of people, a small amount, because we don't have this data, but a small amount of people that are looking into individual pages, or at least commenting about those. So yeah.
Shoki would like to speak.
I think.
And Tanner?
Yeah, Shoki and Tanner as well.
Yeah. Whoever came first, please go ahead. I didn't see.
I have no idea. I'm a little confused by the conversation. I think so. This is the second meeting we've had where we've talked about this kind of ad nauseum. It's an open source design community. So if you feel passionate about Lightning, then contribute to the Lightning section. I guess that's the place where I'm a little confused. Is there a evil force in the world that is keeping us from having people contribute to the Lightning section? Or are we supposed to all turn our focus towards Lightning? That's where I'm just really confused by the general conversation itself.
I think it all comes down to how we're going to tackle the problem. The way of dealing with it is somehow complicated.
Yeah. Well, without it being a straight funded project, right? It's hard to say that we all are going to focus on this one thing to get it done, I think. But I could be wrong. It is, Lightning is Bitcoin, but it is also a subsection of the guide. So I guess my bigger point is to find the people who are very passionate about Lightning and have them cook up a plan that, you know, start cutting the pieces down that they can start to contribute. But if you're dreaming of a place and time where we all decide together to converge on one thing, I think that's a bit. That's going to be a bit of a harder thing to get consensus.
I don't think that's the argument. No, the argument is more like what you just said initially, the how and whether we should have a Lightning section in and of itself. That is like quite a big decision that is going to determine the direction of the guide. If we go the Lightning section route, then that has huge assumptions for the other areas, because you assume that the other areas don't speak to Lightning first. And if that's the case, then there's, like we've heard on this call, there's many different opinions on whether
absolutely
is correct, right? So it's not necessarily about, everyone here agrees that Lightning instant payments is what we need to scale, but
whether it's integrated throughout the entire guide or if it's just its own section, that's the big debate.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and Tanner, like, nobody wants to put together like a gigantic, like, pour a lot of time and effort and love into a gigantic PR that isn't ultimately going to get merged because, you know, people want to, you know, everyone reviewing the PR thinks it should have been done differently. So, yeah, I mean, I see your point. It's definitely a, you know, kind of complicated conversation to have, but, you know, trying to do it so we're not duplicating effort.
Gotcha. Okay.
It's kind of a planning thing in a way, getting all the minds aligned. And for my part, honestly, there's a lot that I don't know about Lightning. I couldn't make a lot of these calls or even know right now what
I'm right there with you.
Would be to do. So all this conversation to me is super helpful.
Yeah, I have a lot to learn with Lightning. I think that it would be very valuable to have. But just from my perspective, it does seem a bit odd to have it integrated throughout the entire guide.
What's your concern around it?
It's less of a concern. It would be more of, especially for newbies, if they're coming in to be introduced to Bitcoin, I would expect them to want to learn about core first and the fundamentals of Bitcoin and then show them layer 2. But that's, again, I don't have a huge extent of knowledge with Lightning.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah, sure.
So, I mean, I definitely think my position is forward thinking, but if we, I guess I'm arguing that moving forward in the future, the majority of products that want to be mainstream non-custodial will need to bake in Lightning Network. And so if you're a product designer, you just need to start with that assumption. And also, to me, the design guide is not, if someone is new to Bitcoin and wants to understand Bitcoin technicals, I would not point them to the design guide as to where to learn Bitcoin core and consensus layer and on-chain stuff. That's not the resource I'd point them to. I'd point product designers who want to build great products to the design guide.
I think Shorky wanted to speak as well.
Did that help, Tanner? Just real quick, I want to make sure.
Yeah, no, it does, and I see where the conflict is for sure, and it does make sense. Like if you want to make good products, but there's all different types of products as well. But yeah, the point is taken. I understand what you're saying.
I want to. I definitely agree. What I'm saying might seem risky or off. So I acknowledge that.
It's ambitious, is what I would say. I would.
All right, I acknowledge it's
super
ambitious. Yeah, ambitious and risk, and some risk. But I'm still not seeing a future where if we don't do that, that we're actually helping the products and product designers we intend to help. So, like I'd want to hear from to convince me otherwise. And again, I'm not the leader here, but just like to change my own view, I would want to hear what are the mainstream non-custodial products we're envisioning that would not use Lightning Network.
I would like to ask, Steve, do you think the technology itself is mature enough so that 90% of the next Bitcoin products are going to run over Lightning?
That's a really good question, and that is some of the risk in going this direction. And that Lightning Network is not as proven out as on-chain Bitcoin. I think we're all comfortable not only in our knowledge of on-chain Bitcoin, but just the fact that it works. And we know we can characterize how it works and what it does, what it doesn't do, and what it does do, we're confident in. With Lightning Network, it's far more mature today than a year or 3 or 5 years ago. And I think it's trending the right direction, but it definitely has more risks in terms of certain limits it hits and certain unknowns. I'm personally comfortable. Well, a combination of I don't know any other option, and I'm confident enough in the trend and the direction it's headed that I'd be comfortable as an advocate for the community to move in this direction. Then again, I don't spend my time contributing to this project, like directly to this project, but I'd be comfortable enough to advocate for that. And I wanted to address one thing Alexa said earlier too. What if or I think I heard Lightning Network being attached to the payment use case, but what if there's other use cases? But I think any use of Bitcoin, whether it's payments or something else, if we want it to scale non-custodially, I don't know of another option than Lightning Network today. So even if all you're doing is receiving payment, like let's say you're a saver and you save a little bit of your paycheck every week to your self-custody wallet, that's 52 received payments and on-chain transactions a year. That doesn't scale to that many users globally. So it would need some other technology. Lightning Network is a candidate. Now, there are definitely challenges around receiving with Lightning Network, but I don't know of another substitute. And could there be other technologies invented in the future that are improve Lightning Network or are substitutes for Lightning Network? Maybe, probably, hopefully. I mean, I hope we keep improving things. And if there's a challenge to Lightning Network, fantastic. But I'm not aware of that. All the other layer 2 and payments competitors or substitutes to Lightning Network are custodial or are somewhere in the spectrum in the middle of trustless. They're not fully trustless. Even Lightning Network, is not as secure as on-chain, but it's at one end of the spectrum.
So real quick, we're a little bit over the hour. Anybody who wants to leave, you're more than welcome to leave or stick around, and we can talk for another 5 hours if you'd like, if there's interest. I'm just really... Go ahead.
No, I think our friend Shorky still hasn't...
Oh, yeah, of course. Sorry, Shorky. Please go ahead.
You're muted. Oh, you're not muted, but you can't hear you. The mic.
Yeah, and just while he's getting ready, just quick to Tanner's point earlier. It's not that we all have to work on Lightning. Whoever wants to work on it can work on it. And if somebody wants to work on multi-key wallets or something else, or gaming or so, that's totally fine too. We're just talking about it a lot because it's kind of the big elephant in the room that's kind of been pushed back a lot. And it clearly generates a lot of conversation, there's a lot of interest. So, and right now it's kind of the place where we try to set a foundation for it and get that big process moving. And if, like Pavlanek said, it might take a year, then it's going to be a really big undertaking, and it's probably worth spending that time. But that doesn't mean that anybody's forced to do anything that they're not interested in.
If Shockey is still working on their microphone, I'd have some stuff I'd like to share. I think they're still working on their mic. All right.
Sure.
I'm gonna go. Yeah, working on it. Let's see. All right. So I'm gonna try and maybe hide you all so you don't have to look at a mirror image of yourself. Can everybody see my Evernote document? Okay. I'm assuming everyone's nodding. Yeah, cool. So I drafted this up when I was kind of reading your GitHub comments, Steve, and this is also kind of inspired by some of the conversation we've been having on some of the other calls. I feel like we're really getting kind of bogged down in some of these conversations by like the hardcore technical specifics. Like, I mean, lightning is a complex topic, right? And I feel like, we all kind of have concerns about different, complex areas. Like my initial concern was, channel management, and somebody else I think was really concerned about the force closes, and Steve, you're really pointing out the offline payments kind of thing. And so I was really trying to balance like, well, how much of these technical things do we want to consider, and how much, to your point, do we want to hide this from the user? And so just to guide my own thinking, I tried to categorize Lightning into like different types of wallets. I don't know if this is helpful, but I'm going to share it. And the first, kind of one I came up with is the idea of these fully custodial wallets, which I feel like is not really what we're doing at all in the Bitcoin design guide. And I've been trying to think, what are examples of a fully custodial wallet? What are the types of people who are going to be using it? And what challenges and design problems does this type of wallet face? And, the fully custodial wallet is not something that I really feel like we need to worry about in the design guide. I lop Strike in there because I know they're not technically fully custodial, but there's no option in the app to let you download your private keys. I stand to be corrected on that point, but that's my perception of it. So we think of Lightning wallets as a spectrum, right? Let's see what happens on the other end of the spectrum. We go all the way down this document. We have wallet connects to full node maintained by the user, okay? Example of that would be Zeus that me and Bosch are helping out with. And this is like hardcore. This is someone has a Zeus app on their phone. They're running Umbrel or Raspberry Blitz or, Eclair or something like that. And this type of user is someone who's incredibly advanced Bitcoin user. They understand Lightning. They have real strong values about self-custody and privacy. They want to manage every single aspect of their own Bitcoin experience. And this kind of person has to not only worry about backing up the wallet, they have to worry about, Tor, offline payments, channel management, the unspendability of the channel reserve. They probably have their own watchtower set up. That's a lot. And I feel like, Steve, when you mentioned wanting to gear this towards the 99% use case, I feel almost like Zeus and Umbrel and Raspberry Bits probably fall outside of that 99%. So we then have in the middle of my document the kind of messy middle here. And I have broken these down into two categories: wallets that use a remote Lightning node, and then wallets that use a local Lightning node and a light client. And this would be an example of this would be like Blue Wallet. They connect you to a remote L&D hub. And by default, you connect to theirs. And then I would put Moon and Breeze into this category. They each run a local copy of LND and use Neutrino. And this is, I feel like this is where the conversation probably should be. Like I love, working with, Zeus and all of that. I contribute a bit of time to that project, but it's also for more advanced users. It's for those people who want to manage every single aspect of that experience. So I was using this as a framework for trying to figure out who the people who are going to be using these types of wallets are, and what are the challenges and the design problems that these type of wallets face, because these are probably the ones that are going to be the majority of the wallets. And I feel like, it's the standard UI stuff that every single wallet, that every single software as a service, application on the face of Earth faces. Then you have backing up the wallet, more than just the mnemonic. You have to have the whole channel state and all that. I do feel like we need to have the consideration of how does the user transfer between layer 1 and Lightning, or if we're not going to allow them to do that in this particular wallet, we need to make that very clear. And I feel like just one of the most important things to me about these kinds of things is just clarifying the relationship right from the start. I really don't know if we want to be getting into trying to teach the users like a ton of techno gibberish about, you know, neutrino and all this kind of stuff. But I do feel like we need to, at least in plain English or whatever your language is, and in plain English terms, explain to them, hey, we help you connect to the Bitcoin network, but, ultimately, you know, your funds are on our node. Like whatever the relationship is, we need to kind of find these plain English ways of clarifying that. So I'd be curious. I'm going to post this document after this call to Slack, and I'd be curious to get everybody's feedback on it. But I really feel like the messy area is probably trying to service the user experience design of these wallets that fall in the middle category. Not custodial, but not you're completely on your own either.
Quick comment. Thanks for that. I agree with almost everything you said, and I like how you laid it out. The only quibble I'd have, the remote Lightning node, like the way Blue Wallet is currently designed, that's custodial Lightning, and the user doesn't have control of their private keys, but a centralized service does.
Thank you for clarifying that. I think you can set up your own L&D hub, right? But most people aren't going to do that.
Yeah, right. And actually, Blue Wallet is moving to non-custodial. So Blue Wallet will be in the same bucket as Moon and Breeze, hopefully later this year.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, that's super helpful. This framing is super helpful.
Is there any wallet that falls in the category where you put Blue Wallet now that is non-custodial?
So because the user doesn't control the private key, so one argument is it's just by definition custodial. I have heard of situations where a provider gives their users like an independent cloud instance where they run a Lightning node. And so a user can authenticate to that cloud service and gain access to their Lightning node and their private key. And it would, and maybe there's gray area there to argue that it's not custodial, but that's kind of, it's definitely riskier security-wise for the user, and it's a bit gray area regulatory-wise, whether that service provider would be regulated.
That's great. I'm learning here. Does one to be non-custodial, does that mean one node per user?
Lightning node?
Yeah, Lightning node.
Yeah. Well, I think to me it means the user has access to their private keys.
Can you have access to your private keys without running a node?
A trusted third party does not have the ability to unilaterally spend that user's money. That to me is what it would be. And you can't, the way Lightning Network is designed, you can't have a third party run the Lightning node without the access to the private keys.
I think it would have to be one L&D node per, or C Lightning or whatever node you're using. I feel like it does have to your point. Yeah, I agree with you, Steve. That you can't have someone being able to spend the funds on your behalf, and also Daniel. I mean, I feel like you would have to have your own Lightning node, because if someone else has the node remotely for you, and you're having to connect to that node to send payments, then they must have the private key on that node, or else they wouldn't be able to spend. So I think so. But the thing to clarify with Lightning, and this is a point of confusion in Bitcoin and Lightning, is when we usually say node in Bitcoin land, we're talking about something that holds a full copy of the blockchain, right? And so like something like Bitcoin D, is going to use up a massive amount of disk space. But something like L&D isn't going to use as much disk space. You can actually run L&D on Android or iOS. It's probably going to be running in a lot of the Lightning software you use in the background. You're just not going to realize it's there. And part of the concern with a lot of these, and part of the debate I think that you hear around node usage, is more on the side of like, well, does this Lightning node have its own have its own Bitcoin node also, or does it connect remotely to another Bitcoin node using Neutrino or something to that effect?
Hey, Stephen.
Hey, Stephen.
Yeah,
myself and Arvinda, we've been creating a similar. Sorry about that. A similar kind of breakdown. Oh my, sorry about that. A similar kind of breakdown of the architecture of these mobile wallets. And something else that should be considered is this other page. I think it's taken from the Ellen book, where it talks about like this layered approach to understanding Lightning, and these layers are things that different wallet developers choose to offload at different points. So, for instance, maybe like the messaging and peer-to-peer layer are like and routing, they're offloaded to somewhere else, something remote, and then you have like the network connection layer as well. If you would like to collaborate on that, I would be really up for it, because the content there so far isn't so. It's quite technical, but I think it has a similar structure to what you mentioned there. Full node on device, partial node on device, remote control node, and third-party control node. That's like the three categories.
We have a fellow Jitster. Is that maybe Shocky joining back in? I'm not sure. If it's your Shocky, now's your time to speak. If not, then we can continue the conversation. One of the things that I'm a little bit unclear on is how deep we actually go with this. For example, I mean, I might be wrong on some of these details, but the business model around Lightning is kind of tricky too, because there's kind of a funding involved in onboarding people to open up those initial channels. I believe there are scenarios in which Moon actually, for a short period of time, holds funds for you while routing them, or if you're offline or so, which then puts them in can create all kinds of different situations. And I feel like there's just a lot we could potentially get into. And we're not there, we'll figure that out. But I think that's going to be an interesting thing to learn about these type of problems, figure out, if that will then force us to come up with more of these types of wallet configurations that maybe work around some of these different issues. So that could then mess things up again, and then those things could change again throughout the year. So it's going to be really interesting.
And before everyone leaves, I'm working on these workshops. The aim is that we create like some kind of like educational material, like hands-on workshops talking about Bitcoin payments. Of course, very focused on Lightning. Helping people set up like some nodes, playing around with passing invoices around. We'll give out some satoshis and whatnot. If anyone is willing to help out on that, please connect with me in the Slack.
Hello.
Here he is.
Oh, finally. Okay, great. Yeah, I don't know like how helpful if I'm saying just some stupid things, but like I'm thinking, if it's a design community, so if we are thinking from the product side of things, so we should not thinking about the underlying like tech that is empowering this thing. Like, is this what like came to mind, that like if like it's kind of like we are doing some design like component for people, but at the same time you are thinking about it from technical perspective. Like you are thinking this is like I don't know what's the example, like an API or a service or whatever. So instead of thinking about from the product and design side of stuff. And like like when I wanted to use like the Bitcoin design guide, it wasn't like I was like, okay, I want to read the guide. It was like I was doing something with subscriptions, and then like I wanted to see what is the best way to do it. So it's kind of like component based. Like like I don't think people just open the guide for the sake of reading it. And like as Steve said, it's not like an educational resource. It's a guide to help people design better products. And I don't know it just came to mind, like, we can do this. Like, what are the Lightning Network product components, and just have those product components like as a high, like, what are the main topic components, and have them at a high level, and then everyone start contribute to whatever part they want. So we kind of have like the main component of product side that is connected to Lightning, and then like people can start contributing to them.
Did you find anything helpful as it relates to subscriptions in the guide?
No, no,
I
but
didn't think you would have known.
yeah, that's true. Like, I didn't find something for the subscriptions, but like this for the cloud backed up wallet for the keys, this was so helpful. Thanks to John, is like he pointed out that it's there.
Yeah, I think that's a huge consideration, is that this thing works for the people who are meant to use it, and that they can take it as a whole and take the big chunk and just build it the way it is, or they can take individual pieces, whether it's just some small UI tweak or a principle of how to even approach, their custody, their approach to custody and whatnot. That's a tricky thing. But yeah, totally agree. So are we, anybody else want to continue chatting? We're almost an hour and a half in. We good? Mr. Pavlinex here said he does not feel like we're in consensus yet. Is this something that we actually want to get to? We feel like we can get to, or should we just kind of, take a nap, have a beer, have some food, and continue this conversation in Slack, GitHub, IRC, wherever else you'd like to chat? Or do you want to continue talking about this at this very moment?
I have a long list of questions. They don't have to be answered now, but I'm really looking forward to a session where we can kind of just ask questions, being stupid, and like show what we don't know. There's so many things I don't know, and I already learned a few bits about nodes now. So I have some questions. Otherwise, we can take it another time.
So we could. One way to do this would be take over the Lightning channel in Slack. It could also be a GitHub discussion that we could open up, where we just say, hey, everybody, this is Lightning question week. Let's all hop in the Lightning channel and shoot away, or something like that.
Yeah, it'd be good to have an async way of asking questions as well. So why don't we do that Slack channel as well? But maybe the next working session is actually a working session on like catching up on whatever we haven't been able to do async. And I love the kind of just listing out the problems, right? This kind of, how do we move funds between, layer 1 and layer 2? How do you fund someone that just comes in and opens up this new consumer wallet, right? There's a ton of stuff we could just list down as like, here are 10 things we need to solve, or here are 10 things we need to learn about, how other people have solved them, etc.
What would others find helpful to do next?
We could just jump into a Figma file next time and start listing out the how might we's, right? Like, how might we integrate Lightning knowledge into the design guide? And then just start listing those things out, get a board together and start building, instead of going, I don't know, like kind of having this uneasy, unknown kind of source. It's like similar to what Steven did today, where he just kind of like broke the problem down into big chunks and like, hey, if we're going to do it, let's look at these problems and start shaping it. And then if people want to pick it up and run with it, they can. One thing that I'm kind of weary of is when you look at these different types of applications, and it was kind of brought up in the conversation with like the funding of the pools. It's like, we're going to reach these points where there is incentives for apps to come in and go like, hey, why don't you guys work on this Lightning app, And so when we're working on core, that's benefiting the greater good of the Bitcoin community. Like, anything we do there will help Bitcoin in the long term. Whereas we start seeing some of these Lightning apps, it's like that could get very hairy very quick. Where if there's funding for a project, then that makes more sense to, lean more heavily into Thor or whatever these wallets might be. But I think it might help to just like do a workshop around this and like just get all the possible solutions of how we might integrate Lightning into the guide.
Yeah, and to piggyback off that idea, just really quickly, perhaps it's my kind of researcher mindset, but what if we had a workshop with some actual builders, product builders online and designers on Lightning, and get them to tell us a little bit more about what their experience has been, what their challenges have been in building products, how do they think about SATs and all the sort of product decisions they made, and what kind of choices they made, why they decide to go custodial or non-custodial. So maybe doing something like that with, kind of with a Figma and sort of trying out what the problems are, then thinking then based on these experiences, their pain points, that we can think about how do we want to approach a design guide and so forth.
I'm just gonna share it again, the workshops. Let's like, if you're interested in it, I have some notes exactly on that, getting some people like Zeus, getting some people like Roy. I think Christoph knows some folks at Moon to come in at like for some of those sessions. I remember last time people were onboarding with Blue Wallet just to like get a feel of like how Lightning works, and Nuno paid some Satoshis for the invoices that we were posting in the payments channel. So it would definitely, I think the wallet developers would be quite open to educating some of the people in the community as well.
Shoki, you raised your hand.
Yeah, like something I'm thinking about, like John said, that like you have to take the technical consideration when you are like doing the product and design stuff now. And like something lately I've been thinking about, like how is it possible like that the design and product community like in Bitcoin start enforce technical decisions? Like it's kind of like we're starting from the other side, but like how can, like, is it possible, and if it's possible, like how can the Bitcoin design community start helping like with the technical decisions that are happening in this space? Like yeah, I'm not so sure. Like, is it clear, the question?
Well, I'd say at least my view is I don't think the Bitcoin design community needs to help the technical community solve technical problems. My position is you have to. It's an important input what the technical constraints are, and from those technical constraints, there are user experience issues and design considerations that need to be evaluated and considered and well thought through. So that and as I've said, I think Lightning Network, like the technology, should be hidden from the users as much as possible. But in order to think up good designs on how to do that, you need to understand the technical constraints.
Yeah, but like I was thinking, like let's say to this tech be fully hidden, the tech people needed some feedback from the design people. Like this is kind of what I meant. Like to make that possible for this experience, like it's needed a shared feedback between like the design perspective and the technical perspective.
So if the design community can mature to a point where it's feeding input to technical community to improve the technical stuff, that would be great. But I think we're not there yet. But that's a great aspiration.
Yeah, like because thinking about it, like you kind of like need a lot of multidisciplinary people to be able to have like this kind of shared feedback.
Yeah, and so this is kind of a tricky thing. So I've also worked with product teams, with startups building like very complex products over years, from startup to big company. And the way those things work, the way you work there, is just you talk all day long. Like designers and developers, they sit together, they throw things back and forth. Sometimes the designer creates some vision concept to figure out what the future could be like, but then development takes a different route. You adjust. Developer suggests something and you integrate in design. It's like this dance. You're always like throwing things back and forth, and that's how you get these really good solutions. And you have a deep understanding of what everybody else is doing. Kind of, you don't, as a designer, you don't go perfectly deep into everything that's happening on the tech side, but you understand enough and you work closely. Now, this is a little bit different than and I don't think you can get to that level in a guide that's meant for a broad audience. That's where we need to have these kind of more long-term, deeper collaborations too, where somebody who contributes to the guide maybe is also a long-term contributor to some specific project that implements something, or we have a workshop where we kind of get to know that problem space very deeply. But yeah, that's ideally the really good design happens is when there's just a really tight collaboration and mutual understanding of design and tech. And that can be very hard to get done because there's a lot of times, as you probably know from companies too, there's kind of these walls and people just throw things over the wall. But ideally we can be all in the same place working together, if that helps.
Yeah, makes sense.
Cool, so a lot of people hopping off. Everybody good? Would you like to chat more?
No, I still have my questions, but I'll go off and read, and I will come back to Slack channel, and I will learn more about Lightning.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, just like a meeting for the book, the Lightning book. So when it's happening, like, heard something like that.
Yeah, so Thunder basically suggested this either today or Friday or over the weekend or so. So it's very new post. But it seems like maybe, and Johns was really into the workshops, maybe Johns and I just kind of take this upon ourselves and try to schedule some workshops and try to make some of this stuff happen. It seems like that's kind of a good way forward. I took a note. It seems like everybody wants all kinds of different workshops. So I feel like we can put this in kind of a schedule, and just like this call, maybe make something happen once a week or so, maybe at different times of the day, so different people can join from different time zones. But yeah, I'll talk to Johns about this, and Pavlinex too, because he's the master organizer.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
How are you feeling, Steve? Are you disheartened by the conversation?
Not at all. I'm glad we had the conversation. And yeah, I didn't expect a decision in this meeting. I was just looking forward to sharing my views, hearing feedback. My takeaway, I think there's Lightning Network is really complicated, and most folks don't have very much knowledge about it. And so that's scary. And then also Lightning Network, as discussed, is not quite as baked as Bitcoin. So there's a little bit of trepidation. Maybe is it premature to add it, or add it in the way that I'm suggesting. And maybe I would call it misconception that Lightning Network is like only for like payments or like one use case or something. You know, there's all these other use cases like gaming and other stuff but that doesn't make sense to me. To me, if you're talking non-custodial scaling, you have to be talking Lightning Network technology. Otherwise, I don't see how you can design products.
Yeah, no, thanks for stating your position clearly as well. I think it helps.
Yeah, and I think to get people more familiar, just encouraging people to play with things, posting links, trying to set up these, channel exchange, showcasing how things work, sharing our own stories. I think all of these type of things will help. Like Daniel, I would also highly recommend just playing with it, getting Blue Wallet, getting Moon, I don't know if you have an Umbrella or so.
I don't yet. I mean, I've only interacted with Lightning with Blue Wallet, but now I've learned that that's that it's not non-custodial. That was news to me, so that's great to know. And I will try more, but I guess that's also one of the things that put me off, right? Like it's a ton of work. Like
I would strongly encourage try using Moon, MUUN.
Yeah. No, I have that on my phone, and I will try to do that. I just have to figure out how to fund it.
I'll send you some Lightning Bitcoin, dude.
Cool. Okay, I can reach out. The good thing about Sats is that it's practically free, right?
Yeah.
Well, one Sat is not much, so sending it back and forth is is doable.
And then once you get your Umbrel set up, you can open channels with me and Christoph.
Yeah, see, that's where I already get lost. All right, like, yeah.
Yeah, before this call, I was trying to rebalance and channel in Thunder Hub or whatever it's called. It was not happening.
Yeah, I mean,
getting
this
there slowly.
is, I think, your point, Steve. I am looking forward to a world where I don't have to care about channels. But today I need to learn about channels to figure out how to get other people.
Use Moon Wallet. You don't have to worry about channels.
Yes, but for the guide's purpose, I need to know how they have solved that problem, right? Like, then see if there are other solutions to the same problem. And but I want to live in that world. I don't want to be a channel manager.
But the thing is actually, if I think this discovery phase for us is actually really great because we can take the whole community along and have everybody there. Like have hundreds of people also on board at the same time onto Lightning while this section is being built. So it's different than we already knew everything. We just write it down and post it, right? That's different. But now we can have all these workshops. We'll have videos from the workshops with all the basic questions and everything. So I don't know, I could see this as being kind of a good thing.
Yeah. Can I use that key name, key pay, whatever thing?
Key send.
Key send. Can I use that with Moon? Can I use it with any wallet?
I don't know the answer offhand.
Okay.
Yeah.
Keysend is still very experimental, right? I think roast beef.
Yeah, I think LND's has it implemented and merged. I think C Lightning's added it, and I know Val and LDK is adding it right now. But in terms of adoption by wallets in the space, that's where I'm a little more fuzzy on my knowledge.
Because I think LND just dropped it a year ago. Not dropped, as in added it. I think they just merged that a year ago, so it's still kind of new.
And you would set that up in your own node. Like if I wanted to connect my, whatever email, phone number, identity to the key send, I would have to do that in my own node.
I can describe it at a high level. What is it? So without keysend, traditional Lightning Network, in order for me to pay Daniel has to give me an invoice, and then I pay that invoice. So there has to be an interaction between us. That, of course, doesn't satisfy sort of the Venmo use case of me just unilaterally deciding to pay Daniel. With keysend, that makes it possible. The way it's done is I would need to have access to Daniel's Lightning node pub key, which is a unique identifier for him. And then to improve the user experience, you can imagine a wallet, instead of exposing me to this knowledge of pub keys and Lightning node pub keys and his pub key and show me that string, it just maps it to his contact in my phone. So my experience is I'm paying Daniel. But what's actually happening, it's paying that pub key. And the nice thing about paying that pub key versus paying a Bitcoin on-chain address is that there's not the related privacy issues with reusing a Bitcoin address. You can reuse a Lightning Network node pub key, and you're not sacrificing the user's privacy.
Got it.
Because it never goes on-chain anywhere.
So keysend sort of replicates a thing that wasn't originally available in Lightning, i.e. the public key.
The pub keys always existed, but there's just not been, prior to keysend, there hasn't been a way to pay in that style.
Okay, yep, got it.
Now, just to add further complications, there's no spec for keysend. Lightning Labs just implement it themselves. C Lightning followed, now LDK is following. There's still no spec. That's a bit of a detail, but we kind of need a spec. And then another wrinkle, there's other proposals such as offers, in which this is a subset of the functionality. So keysend as a spec might even go away in the future. But I think from a product designer perspective, we can be confident that this style of payment will exist in our network, and we can provide guidelines to product designers in supporting this type of payment. That invoices aren't the only way.
Great, thanks.
I could imagine a future where, let's say hypothetically, it remains with KeySyn as the standard, and that becomes standardized and all that. You could take the node's public key and maybe hook that into a service like Gravatar. Like Gravatar has just kind of like become this service we're all used to, and no one even knows it's there. It's like that's how you put your email address into Slack and other services, and they just pull up your avatar, your photo automatically, because it's stored in Gravatar. So you could have something like, a service along those lines. If it has the node public key there, then, instantly you have Lightning, payment, information there available if you wanted that to be publicly available.
Yeah. And one more question. You can't create an empty channel, correct? You need to fund it, even if no transaction has yet happened.
Correct. And historically, so there's two parties in a channel, and historically just one of them is allowed to fund it. But there's work right now to allow dual funding in which both parties can fund the channel. But you're correct. You're correct that, like, you and I can't create a channel that has no funding.
Yeah. What's the minimum funding?
I don't know the actual answer. But it would need to consider like the on-chain fees to close the channel. So I'm sure there's some kind of minimum set there. Otherwise, you'd have a channel that you would be unable to close if the amount in the channel is less than the current fee rate.
In the Umbrella community, they recommend a minimum of 250,000 sats. There's a whole thread where people exchange channels, and this was the minimum, but they recommend 500,000.
How much is that roughly in dollars?
$250 or something like that.
Right. So this is not the cheap affair.
It's not $250 minimum. No.
Pavlenix also says, here. Okay, my math is off. So what is it? Somebody.
I mean, it depends on the price of Bitcoin if you're looking at looking at dollars. But right now, no. I mean, I think it's probably about $100, I'd estimate.
Months ago it was 250.
For the 250,000.
There's no.
I'm sorry. No,
but there's no way it's $100 minimum channel. I have many channels that are less than $100.
Okay.
So my guess would be that it's the cost of one Bitcoin transaction minimum, give or take.
2 ideally for the open and close.
Okay. So, but it should be sub $50 at least, right?
Yeah, and you also have to consider that you want to. In this Lightning Network Plus website, or what it's called, that John's shared today, I tried it out, and they recommend those channels to be open for a long period of time, like 2 years or so. Right? You want them to be open for a long time because opening closing is so expensive, and that way you kind of want to lock in a bit more, so you have more liquidity that can be moved back and forth, so you can make a $100 payment if you need it.
Right, got it. This is why I've heard about renting channels and stuff. So imagining Moon's architecture then. So I have my own node. I'm a user of Moon. I have my own node. But to actually interact, they need to create a channel for me. So they spend the money to open a channel to my node, regardless if I have made any transactions or not. That could become expensive very quickly, right?
I think that's going to be the business opportunity, though, and shut me down if I get any of this wrong, Steve. But I mean, that's going to be the huge, business opportunity for, people entering this space, is that, if you have raised a lot of capital and you want to start, basically you're kind of fronting people liquidity, if you think about it. So if you allow people to open channels, if you open channels with people, you can profit off of that over making transaction fees over the long term. And that's not the kind of thing is, running a home node that's going to be really scalable. You might make some spending money, but if you're a business and you have capital invested in providing liquidity and opening channels with people, you could make some money over the long term with that.
The last I checked on with Breeze, they took a small percentage fee from that channel opening. So they're at least experimenting with that type of business model. But I mean, but your point is correct, Daniel, that there's risk taken by the Breezes and Moons of the world. Stephen's right that there's business opportunity there. I mean, so it's sort of, you know, there's some experiments out in the wild right now to tease out. Those companies are doing things to improve the user experience dramatically.
Yeah, no, I think it's great, and it's a risk worth taking in the beginning.
TBD whether it works out.
Yeah, it scales for them for now, I assume, I hope. But I'm thinking something like, you know, Cash App or, you know, say PayPal wanted to use Lightning Network. It seems to me that this earning opportunity might be something tempting to them, like, you know, taking a little cut. That sounds a little bit worrying to me, but also feasible.
In what sense? So let's say like Cash App and PayPal come out with services that use Lightning Network. They take a cut, let's say 2%. There's nothing preventing Moon and Breeze from taking a 1% cut, or, you know, there'd be competition there.
Yeah, I guess you know, being worried is the wrong phrasing here. Maybe it was like slightly unfortunate if we end up in a situation back where, you know, we're it's non-custodial, but we're still in the world where, you know, there's middlemen taking a cut of most people's payments, you know, given this is likely how the majority of people will set up their tech, right? That's all I meant, right? You know.
Okay, I agree. That's not the outcome I think any of us want. So I think we need to keep our eyes on, you know, are there moats somehow being built that allow big companies to obtain and then defend that from new entrants? And if so, that's what we need to figure out how to you know, battle.
I guess there might be kind of graduation levels here as well. Like, you know, a user that ends up with a certain amount in their wallet, maybe they can over time, you know, stop using that channel that someone else funded and takes a cut of and open their own channel, right? It's not a closed, you know, you're not stuck necessarily with a channel that someone else opened for you. So I guess that's good.
Yeah, I mean, I have what is it, 5, 6, 7 channels to my node right now, and I assume the routing does do some math on the cheapest and fastest route. I'm not familiar with the details of that, but I assume that's taken into consideration. So I don't think you're ever stuck in some expensive channel, unless that's the only channel that you might have. But even then, it might not even work due to the one-sided liquidity or so.
Why do you have 5 or 6 channels?
For better network connection, I guess. So there's more liquidity can move around, and cheaper, faster, better. Help other people, route other people's payments potentially too.
So Daniel, this is another area of experimentation and you know, challenges. So if I want to pay you, say 100,000 sats, if I only have one, you know, and let's say we don't have a direct channel, so we're going to use the Lightning Network, and we have to find a route from me to you, and that could be through 1 hop or 2 or 3 or 10 hops, and there's, you know, an unlimited, or there's a finite number of routes, but there's, you know, we have to find routes that have capacity for me to pay you 100,000 sats. Now, a new improvement to Lightning Network is AMP, in which you can split up that 100,000 into multiple payments. So you can do multiple routes, but it's all atomic. So either, like, let's say the 100,000 is split up into 3 chunks or two chunks of 50,000 each. then either all of them get sent or neither. So it sort of ensures that atomicity. But it makes it easier to find routes because it's a smaller amount of Bitcoin. And I think that is implemented in all the major Lightning Network implementations now.
Got it. Thanks everybody for being patient with my questions. I have 1,000 more, so I think I should stop here and go and make some dinner. But I'm really grateful for being able to ask them.
I'm sure a lot of other people have all the same questions, and I think we need to talk through all of this stuff.
I mean, sitting around talking about Bitcoin is fun. I mean,
we're only 2 hours in. How long do you want to go? No, I'm going to stop the recording now. Is it okay if I post this whole up until now, or do you prefer me to cut it off earlier?
No, that's cool.
I'm good.
Okay.
I'm good.
I'll stop it here now.